Can you hear me? Okay.
We hear you, Maya.
Hi. So hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Maya Shoam, and I'm the Partnership Director for Afula Gilboa and the South New England communities in the United States. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Partnership Together is a Jewish agency platform for connecting Israeli cities with the Jewish communities worldwide. Like this partnership, there are 45 partnerships happening right now. Our partnership connects the city of Afula and the Gilboa Regional Council with 11 Jewish communities, such as yourself, from the South New England area in the US. Through these connections, we provide each other support and solidarity, joint professional programs in different fields like medicine, education, and more. Since COVID has entered our lives, most of our programs became virtual, and yet we keep engaging in programs such as this that enrich the lives of our community on both sides of the ocean and provide a taste of your home away from home to members of your Jewish community. Before we start, I would like to show you a little bit of the shared society that, that our region consists of. 1 second, I will share this.
Partnership Together of the Jewish Agency fosters encounters between Israelis living in the Afula Gilboa region in northeast Israel and the Jewish communities of southern New England, commonly known as SNCC. Strong connections were developed in the past 2 decades in many fields of interest. Jews and Arabs, Muslims and Christians all live together in the Afula Gilboa region. Many shared living initiatives and coexistence programs were introduced and implemented by the partnership. The old synagogues, the church, the traditional Arab villages, and primarily the personal stories are worth a visit. Arab Israelis comprise almost 40% of Gilboa's residents and are nearly 50% of Afula's workforce. The coexistence of the 3 religions, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian, is unique to the region. Even during periods of tension and uncertainty, our region remained relatively tranquil thanks to informal education conducted by many local organizations and the regional council. Our region is a lesson in coexistence. From the earliest days of the State of Israel, immigrants have been a part of the region's story. Yemenites, Moroccans, Ashkenazi, and Kurdish immigrants were settled in the Gilboa. Romanians, Iraqi, and North African groups arrived in Afula. In the early 1990s, thousands of Russian immigrants arrived in Afula. While in the years that followed and up to the present, the Jewish Agency is bringing Ethiopian Jews to Afula and Beit Alpha in the Gilboa.
הגעתי לאפולה הנה, עכשיו הבית שלי, יש לי 5 ילדים, ברוך השם, עם ילדים, אני אוהבת אפולה.
We invite you to come and hear the immigration stories firsthand. Afula Gilboa, partnering with people who create Israeli reality.
I'm gonna show 2 videos, I think, and then.
Hello again. At this point, I would like to start a program and hand the conversation to the chair of the JCRC of the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford, who initiated this event today. Thank you, Gary. Please.
Thank you, Maya. I want to thank everyone for taking the time today to join us. One of the goals of the JCRC's Israel Task Force is to learn and share information about the diversity of Israel and the efforts at building a shared society. Earlier this year, we had a presentation by an NGO, Tech to Peace, that is bringing Arabs and Israelis together to learn technical skills and also to learn about each other. We also had a program brought by Hand in Hand, which is about Israeli schools that is composed of Jews and Muslims learning together. These sessions are available because they've been recorded. And if you would like to have them, please contact Alana Butler at the Hartford Jewish Federation. Today, we're going to learn about the experiences of Ethiopian Jewish Israelis who have journeyed to the Afula Gilboa region, which is obviously our sister region. I want to thank Maya and SNEC for helping, and the Jewish Agency for Israel for putting this program together. Now, Jay Weinstein of the Jewish Agency Director of Missions will start our exploration. Thank you.
Okay, good morning to everybody. My name is Jay Weinstein, and it is my honor to welcome you to our virtual mission as we journey together from Ethiopia to Beit Alpha, Israel, which is in your partnership region. So I see a few people already introduced themselves in the chat. Please continue to do so we get to see everybody. It's a very, very crowded room, and we thank each and every one of you for joining us today. On our mission here this morning, I am honored to be joined by two very esteemed colleagues who are going to serve as our scholars in residence. Obviously, every good mission needs scholars in residence. So first we have Penina, who recently began the role of director of the Global Partnerships Network. So everything you love about P2G, about your partnership, times that by hundreds of communities around the world, these are all now under the leadership of Penina. And second is Shira. Shira was a recent shlicha, emissary to Ethiopia, assisting hundreds and thousands of Ethiopians to make Aliyah. She now serves as a coordinator in the Aliyah Center in Beit Alpha, which together this morning we will visit virtually. Shira was actually just in Ethiopia last week, and she'll share some of her thoughts about that. I also want to thank my esteemed colleague, your very own Nathan Schechter from Greater Hartford, who was here and very instrumental in putting together all of the information and everything we're going to journey with this morning. The room is very crowded. We anticipate a very full flight. But before we board to Ethiopia and begin our journey, let's take a moment to give context to what we're about to see. The story of the Ethiopian Jewish community is incredible, even miraculous. After being separated for thousands of years from general society and from the typical Jewish community, here we see the return of Ethiopian Jews to the land of Israel. For many of those who are part of this journey, we believe it's a fulfillment of the age-old prophecy from Isaiah from thousands of years ago, that God will one day bring back Jews from all corners of the world, including from Kush, which is modern-day Ethiopia. So, before we get started, again, feel free to keep using the chat. We'll ask questions. We have a few polls. So, curious what your thoughts are. Let's take a little bit of a poll with you. How many Ethiopian Israelis do you believe approximately are currently living in Israel? The poll should be now on your screen. Feel free to share your thoughts. How many are here today in Israel? Okay, great job. We'll give another few seconds. I see a lot of people answering. Okay. So 25,000, 4 of you thought that. Nope, way too low. 50,000, getting closer, but still too low. 80,000, warm, very warm, but still too low. Today in the state of Israel, we proudly have approximately 130,000 Ethiopian Israelis. So before we start our journey, let's take a moment and just remind ourselves of the different waves of Aliyah that we've had. Beginning with Operation Moses. I invite you, if you want to take a guess, why was the first wave of Ethiopian Aliyah called Operation Moses? Feel free to make your suggestion in the chat. About 40 years ago, entire families, villages, in the middle of the night, secretly left with whatever they could fit on their back, their meager belongings, went on a trek of hundreds of miles to walk to Israel via the Sudan desert. Though some 12,000 Olim made it during this first wave of Aliyah to Israel, tragically they paid an unbearable price, with over 3,000 men, women, and children passed away on the journey. Next, we have Operation Solomon. Again, in the chat, I invite you to share your thoughts. Why do you think the second wave of Aliyah was called Operation Solomon? Here we have the amazing historic airlift. In the middle of a bloody civil war in Ethiopia, Israel rescued over 14,400 Jews in just 36 hours. In fact, we broke one of the Guinness Book of World Records. Take a look at your Zoom poll. I invite you to take a guess. Which Guinness Book of World Records was broken during Operation Solomon? Poll screens are on, poll is on your screen. Let's see, Guinness Book of World Records. Correct, just about everybody got this one. The most amount of people who flew on that specific airplane took place during Operation Solomon. In fact, the plane actually took off with 1,088 passengers and landed with 1,089. Imagine being the woman on that plane having a baby. Now, of course, we get to modern Operation Sur Yisrael. Over the last 2 years during the global pandemic, where skies shut around the world, we at the Jewish Agency are proud that in partnership together with you, Aliyah never stopped. Over 20,000 new immigrants during the pandemic arrived in Israel, and particularly for us, this afternoon, this morning, as we travel on our journey to Ethiopia, we should know that over 2,000 Ethiopian Olim immigrants have come to their homeland over the last year or two during Corona. Many of these Olim, as we'll see later, have been separated from their families for years, even decades. And our goal for 2022, together with your partnership and support, is to bring over 3,000 Olim during this year. Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing. Perhaps you weren't aware, but you just actually took the fastest flight ever, directly from your home to Ethiopia, to Addis Ababa, the capital. I hope you're not jet lagged. And for those who we sent in first class, you can thank us later. On our visit, we're going to venture to the north of the country, to a city called Gander. There we'll visit the Jewish community. There we will see the local JCC, witness daily life, and meet a family waiting for Aliyah. My apologies for the bumpy landing. Hope everyone is feeling okay. The airport in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa is a fairly modern one of the more high-tech airports in the country, around Africa. Addis Ababa, the last few years, have significantly advanced in technology. We even now have the first modern fast train. But as you'll see, all these developments are really around Addis Ababa. As we travel around up north to Gander and the villages around it, you'll see very different than these modern images I'm showing you now. So we are now off to Gander, and voila, we have landed again, the fastest 2-hour flight you have ever taken, brought to you by the Jewish Agency. So here we are in the University of Gander, one of the most prestigious universities in the country. And you can see the beautiful surroundings and the mountains. Not to worry, we're not taking you on a tiyul. You don't have to hike up a mountain today, just sharing with you the beautiful scenery. As you're on the bus driving towards our destination, please, you'll see the open market. You'll see that it looks like it could have been around a few hundred years ago. A difficult way of living, perhaps. Please note that most residents in this village and around Gander do not have running water nor electricity. And this includes the Jewish community in Gander. You have people on the streets. You can see the traditional Ethiopian dress. You can see the way they're carrying their children on their back. And as we get off the bus, 2 young children smile. They haven't seen many visitors like us recently, and they're happy to greet us. As we walk towards the center of the Jewish community, past a little market, things that you might want to buy. Don't spend too much time here, but if you have a few extra pennies, you're welcome to buy something. And you see, again, Ethiopians hard at work, but the technology, the modern day work that they're doing is very different than we are used to. So we are getting now to the Jewish community, to the center of Gondar, to the synagogue, and to the JCC. I pause here for a moment, and it is my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Penina, who's serving as one of our scholar residents of our program. Penina, welcome. Kindly take a moment, share with us a little bit first about your own Aliyah story, and particularly what this picture here means to you.
Erev Tov, well, good morning to you all. I'm really happy and excited to be here, and thank you, Jay. So I found those two pictures actually, I think 15 years ago when I did my own research about the Ethiopian Jewry in the Hebrew University. And it's kind of a shivering moment to read a book of Micha Feldman that maybe some of you know him, was the first shaliach of the Jewish Agency to Ethiopia back then in the 80s. And I was doing a research about the Aliyah and we're looking for testimonies. And all of a sudden I'm looking at the picture on your, I guess, on your right with the three girls. And I recognize the face of my sister standing there in the end of the picture, and two of my cousins that holding the suitcase. And I couldn't believe it, you know, as a student to see that in the book. It was the first time I see myself in part of the history, part of something that been told in books that other people was reading. And it took me a moment to actually recognize myself and my own mother. In the other picture next to it, you see the little girl, it's me on my first day in Israel, and my mother holding me. And you can tell by the look in our eyes that we are kind of a shock, looking ahead at the photographer who was hired by the Israeli government to photograph the first image of the first Ethiopian Olim to arrive to Israel. And that's how I also learned the exact date of our arrival to Israel. So those two pictures was taken from our first day landing in Israel. We just arrived. We're still wearing the same clothes we were for 8 months during the refugee camp, waiting in Sudan to come to Israel. And it's the same clothes we wear for a 12-day walking 400 kilometers, crossing the desert from Ethiopia to Sudan in order to arrive to Israel safely. So in my case, our group came, we went 30 people out of our village, and we survived and arrived to Israel around 25 people. Well, 5 of our fellow lost their life trying to come to Israel and fulfill the dream as we did in November 27, 1984. So that's surely my story. And today we live happily in Israel. I live in Modi'in with 3 of my kids and my husband, Avi, that also came at the same time, but we didn't really share the same road, walking through Sudan. And my mother lives in Haifa with two siblings that born in Israel. And my older sister that you see in the picture actually live in the States closer to you in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for the last 20 years.
Wow, thank you so much.
Sure.
So walk us through a little bit, Penina. What are we looking at over here?
So now we enter in the heart of the community. You know, this is the JCC, kind of a synagogue, all the services from managing the community to youth movement and children activities. You're soon going to see even the nutrition and feeding program. And the religious service of the mikveh and synagogue, and also some activities of the Jewish Agency volunteers. It's all happened here. It's kind of JCC community center. The youth movement of Bnei Akiva operate here. Right now you see the Abima and the benches for davening, for Shabbat services, as you see right now in the pictures. And every day you can see people entering this area for services in the morning. Now let's listen to this video shortly. Can you put the sound?
Coming on in a moment.
Okay. So meanwhile, I'll tell you that they were playing the game in Hebrew. Okay. Okay, so you just saw the game that we call the Ben Akisaot, when the kids are playing around the chairs and they need to find the right chair. And right here you see one of our volunteers. So we sent to Ethiopia volunteers. Some of them are Ethiopian-born volunteers that serve in the Ethiopian-Israeli community. And we just heard the children having fun and joining the chair game. Now we're going to see how they spreading the food over there. It's all, you see the bananas, you see some boiled eggs, everything that you see here. It's the nutrition and feeding program, that it's an important aspect of our work to ensure their basic nutrition for young children and pregnant and nursing mothers. Until COVID, this was actually almost a restaurant here and people came and eat, but right now because of COVID, we just provide them with the food and send them back home where the mother and children can just come and take some meals. To the COVID, we changed the entire operation and we have a package of food for them. And it's simply, you know, the most simple food you can see here, but it's actually the most significant part for their meal during the day as well. And here we see that our offices in Gondar, and that's where we're preparing them for the interview. And now, after a short drive, we arrived to the offices and you see the people that waiting here outside. It's the most dramatic moments that take place here. Families come here to be interviewed to determine their eligibility for Aliyah. Here they will be given the answer that they all pray that it will be a yes to come to Israel. And we are entering the interviewing room number 3. We're gonna meet here a family that entered the room to be interviewed by the government of Israel official. You see all the family members, okay? And here in the meetings, he's gonna ask the whole household with their names and their relatives in Israel, and we'll interview the entire family. The government is working based on those lists, and those are sources from the community, the government record, and application made by family members in Israel. So far, that you should know that the Israeli government went through 20,000 requests like that. Okay, it's a lot of application to go through in order to ensure the one that eligible to Aliyah. Now you see the woman holding picture. What's mean of this list, it's that the life of entire families are at stake, as loved ones have been separated for years and even decades. The women here are holding pictures of their families in Israel. They separate from them for many, many years. And by holding those pictures, they actually asking us to reunite them back to their family. Now we're on the drive to Adi's family. Let's go and meet such a family like that. And caution where you go and step. I did share that for the most part, there is no running water and there is not electricity. Here is, you can see a lady in a second throwing out a dirty water into the streets. Okay, and now we're gonna meet Adi's family and share their story with you.
Wow, thank you, Penina. Incredible. So unfortunately, the story of the Adis family is a little bit of a painful one. Here we have Yael Ganish and her 4 children. And she and her family live in a small village outside of Gondar. And while she was married at a young age and lived in the village, the rest of her family, the broader family, moved to Gondar to wait and apply for Aliyah. And they waited there several years, about 10 years, until finally their family was approved to go to Israel. A dream that they had waited historically hundreds, if not thousands of years to go back to the Holy Land. But with immense joy, there was also concern. How can they go and leave Yaglanish behind? Truly believing that Yaglanish would be able to follow soon, they made the decision they could not give up this opportunity to go to Israel. Their sister, their daughter, would soon arrive after them. So Yaglanish was left behind, and she lived out in the village with her family, her immediate family. And in her hope to make Aliyah, she had a difficult decision to make. And she decided to leave her village with her children and move to Gondar, where she could await Aliyah. In Gondar, she's almost like a refugee. She has no property, no home, no community. She's living in a 60-foot mud hut, probably equivalent to our modern day bathrooms, but of course, without electricity or running water. Perhaps most challenging is without the support of her family, because her family had been taken on Aliyah to Israel. She waits and waits about 10 years with the hope and belief that when the time is right, God will ensure her arrival in Israel. Here you see her with her family. Here you see her waiting every single day. While Yaglani struggles and waits, her mother is in Petach Tikva, also waiting. She has never met her grandchildren, and she has a hole in her heart every single day that she has to wait for their aliyah. Now, don't get off Zoom, stay with us. Shortly, you'll see the ending of the story. So back for a moment to our bigger story and our bigger picture. Here we have the moment we've been waiting for. Olim from Ethiopia, after years of waiting, praying, dreaming, advocating, they're finally on their way home. In the middle of the night, they pack up the bus with their luggage, and notice there in the middle, a traditional Ethiopian basket that they're bringing with them, which is needed for the traditional injera bread, a complete must in an Ethiopian home. Here they're getting ready, they're boarding the bus, take them in the middle of the night from Gondar to Addis Ababa. And we are on the plane with the Olim. They are so tired, but yet so excited. It's hard to believe that just a 4-hour plane ride is all they need to get to their destination, to their homeland. Fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, as we are arriving in Israel. Perhaps this view is one that you've missed over the last 2 years. The coastline of Israel, the Mediterranean Sea, the high rises of Tel Aviv, our plane with the new Olim from Ethiopia are here on the ground. What a welcome, the first flight of Operation Sur Yisrael. Of course, it's COVID, so we have to take all the precautions necessary. And as they exit the plane, they are greeted by spiritual leaders of the Ethiopian community, by the Minister of Aliyah, an Ethiopian Israeli, by the Prime Minister, and of course, the former chair of the Jewish Agency, Mr. Isaac Herzog. First thing they do, kiss the land. This is the land they dreamt about, that they've waited and prayed to come. So what about Yaglanish? What happened to her and her family? So after nearly waiting 20 years, 10 years while her family was in Gondar and she was living in the village, and then 10 years after she made Aliyah and her family with her, and she and her family were living in Gondar, after 20 years, the beautiful moment of reunification of her family. The beautiful sight of her mother welcoming her to Israel. So now, it is my honor to welcome you to your own partnership region and to your Aliyah Center, Beit Alpha. Of course, we're still in COVID, as you keep your masks on, please keep social distancing, let's keep everybody safe. And now we have our very own Shira. Shira, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us as our second scholar in residence. Before we get into the Aliyah Center, take a moment, please. Share with us a little bit about your own Aliyah in your family story. Shira is gonna speak in Hebrew, and we'll translate her in English.
שלום לכולם. אני עליתי במבצע שלמה ב-1991.
1991, she came on Operation Solomon.
גרנו בכפר קטן בצפון אתיופיה. את העלייה עשיתי עם ההורים שלי ושלושה אחים שלי.
So she lived in a very little village in North Ethiopia and came with her family and 3 brothers.
אחותי הגדולה נשארה מאחור, והגענו לאדיס אבבה. את המסע עשינו ברגל מהכפר לאדיס אבבה. בעיקר הלכנו בחושך.
They walked on their feet from Gondar to Addis Ababa, not a simple task, obviously. And her older sister remained behind in Ethiopia.
באחד הלילות שהלכנו, אני זוכרת שהייתי ילדה, אז בכיתי ואבא שלי תפס לי את הפה, ואני מאוד פחדתי מאבא שלי בגלל מה שהוא עשה.
One night in the middle of their journey, all of a sudden her father covered her mouth and held it very tight. She didn't understand why.
ככה המשכנו את הדרך והגענו לאדיס אבבה. באדיס אבבה היה שם את הסוכנות היהודית בעצם, היה שם מרכז הזנה והיה מסגרת לימודית לילדים.
So she never really understood why her father covered her mouth, and she didn't make a big deal of it. She was young at the time. And they finally arrived to Addis Ababa, where the Jewish Agency was there to welcome them and help them with Aliyah, to take care of nutritional needs that they need and other other aspects of the Aliyah process.
אני זוכרת שזה היה בשעה מאוד מוקדמת בבוקר, שבאו דפקו בדלת ואמרו לנו, אנחנו יוצאים ועולים לישראל. אני לא כל כך הבנתי מה קורה, אני רק זוכרת שהיו כמות גדולה מאוד של אנשים, וכולם פשוט הלכו, לא הבנתי לאן אנחנו הולכים, פשוט הלכנו. פחדתי לאבד את ההורים שלי.
So one time in the middle of the night, they got a knock on the door and they said, it's time, we're making Aliyah. You got to come with us. So she didn't really understand what was going on. Again, she's a young child, but all she remembers as she was walking towards the airport where the airplane is going to take off, there were just many people who were walking together with her.
הגענו לישראל, אנחנו נקלטנו בעיר אילת, אני זוכרת את אמא שלי, היא חשבה שאנחנו נגיע לירושלים, ואמא שלי לא הבינה למה ירושלים נראית מדבר.
So when they first landed, her family was brought to live in Eilat. And her mother thought actually they were living in Jerusalem. So she couldn't understand why Jerusalem was all of a sudden in the middle of the desert, not realizing she's in Eilat and not in Jerusalem.
ואחרי שנים שהייתי בארץ, אז המקרה שאבא שלי תפס לי את הפה, זה מאוד הפריע לי הרבה שנים, ואני זוכרת שהייתי כבר מתבגרת, שאלתי את אבא שלי למה הוא עשה את זה, כי חשבתי שהוא רוצה לפגוע בי. אבל הוא הסביר לי שאם הייתי צועקת, אז זה יכל אפילו לעלות לנו בחיים, ואנשים יכלו לאבד את החיים שלהם בדרך.
So she never all these years asked her father why that night he grabbed her and covered her mouth. She never understood that. Until she was a little bit older, they were in Israel and settled, and she finally asked him, this has been bothering me. Why did you do that? It felt like, you're hurting me. And he explained to her, you were yelling because you were scared. And had anyone heard you, it would have been a very dangerous situation. Perhaps even we would have lost our life. And therefore, I had to cover your mouth and stop you from making too much noise. And Shira finally understood what was behind that action of her father.
היום אני עובדת בסוכנות היהודית 13.5 שנים, אני נשואה, אימא ל4 ילדים. עבורי זה סגירת מעגל, להיות בעצם הארגון שהביא אותי ואת המשפחה שלי לארץ, להיות שייכת לארגון הזה ולסייע לעולים חדשים, גם לעלות לארץ וגם להיקלט בצורה נכונה ומיטבית בישראל.
So today she's married with children, and it's kind of like completing the circle for Shira. She works in the Jewish agency now, and she's able to help Olim come from Ethiopia to Israel. Obviously, after her first personal experience, it's very meaningful for her to now have this role and to be able to help other immigrants from Ethiopia.
זהו, יש עוד סגירת מעגל שנייה, שאני גם תושבת עפולה, אני עובדת במרכז קליטה בטלפה, ואני גרה בעפולה, והבת שלי לפני 5 שנים היא הייתה בג'ש מכבי אצלכם בקהילה, ולפני 2 היא הייתה גם במחנה קיץ בבוסטון, ליאל אמן, כמה אני מזהה שם אנשים שמכירים.
Wow. So it's also coming full circle because now her daughter has been a shlicha, an emissary in a few different places in North America, including not far from you, including Boston, including Seattle. So that's very meaningful.
אז זו סגירת מעגל שנייה עבורי, כי קהילות בארצות הברית ידועות בכמה שהן כן עוזרות, עזרו ועדיין עוזרים ותומכים בקהילת יוצאי אתיופיה, גם בעלייה וגם בקליטה. אז עבורי זה גם סגירת מעגל שהבת שלי גם הייתה בבוסטון וגם הייתה בסיאטל השנה בשנת שירות.
So this again is full circle for her because for so many years, the North American Jewish community, which we're very thankful for, helped Olim from Ethiopia and we're part of the story. And now her own children are able to be shlichim and emissaries and be able to give back to the North American Jewish community. So it's very meaningful and very special to her. Wow, Toda Rabah. Thank you so much, Shira. Beautiful. Beautiful. We're very blessed that Shira, as I mentioned before, is part of the Aliyah Center at Beit Alpha, and she is the warm face greeting new Olim. And under her care and the other professionals for 2 or 3 years, the Olim are learning Hebrew, learning how to succeed in society, getting the mental health care that they need, the physical health care that they need. And we're very blessed and grateful to have Shira working with our Olim. So now we continue in to the Aliyah Center, Beit Alpha in your P2G region. we obviously must start with a Buna coffee ceremony. I'm sure many of you have maybe tasted Ethiopian coffee before. If you do, you're welcome to give us a thumbs up if you've ever actually participated in a Buna coffee ceremony. And of course, there's some popcorn you'll see and Ethiopian bread called dabu. Shira, tell us for a moment, why is the Buna coffee ceremony so important to the Ethiopian community?
הארץ המולדת של הקפה, בעצם הקפה נוצר מאזור קפיה שבאתיופיה, וכל אורח מכובד, במיוחד כמוכם, אז כל אורח שמגיע בעצם לבית מקבלים אותו בטקס הבונה.
So every important guest, which you guys are today, our important guests, gets greeted with this beautiful and meaningful ceremony, which originated in Ethiopia, but now the community does even today in Israel.
קפה, בעצם את הבונה מתחילים בפולי קפה ירוק ששוטפים אותו, קולים אותו, ובעצם קולים אותו עד שהוא נהיה שחור, טוחנים, ואז מבשלים אותו במים חמים.
So they ground the beans, they roast them, and then of course with hot water make coffee.
לטקס הבונה בעצם יש לו משמעות חברתית מאוד חשובה באתיופיה. באתיופיה אין פייסבוק, אינסטגרם או כל רשתות חברתיות בשביל להתעדכן, גם לא טלוויזיה, לפחות לא בזמנים שאנחנו היינו. אז כן, זה זמן איכות בעצם שאנשים מתאספים, מתעדכנים בדברים חדשים.
So it's very, very integral in Ethiopian society because, again, you don't have Facebook to chat with people and have, online social groups. This was a social outlet. This was the ceremony that people get around, socialize, talk to each other, meet with each other, and keep up the importance of the Ethiopian family gathering.
בעצם מי שמכינה את הקפה בדרך כלל זאת המארחת, לרוב זאת האמא בבית או אולי בת גדולה, ולצד הבונה מגישים בדרך כלל דאבו. דאבו זה הלחם שבכל בית יהודי אתיופי בעצם נמצא, זה דאבו שמכינים אותו, זה לחם שמכינים אותו בשבת, בוצעים אותו, בדרך כלל זה מישהו מבוגר בוצע את הלחם, ובעצם מחלקים. את החלק האמצעי בדרך כלל נותנים לגברים ולבוגרים.
So the one who usually does the Buna Cafe ceremony is the woman who's the hostess of the family. And of course, in addition, you have a very special dabu bread, Ethiopian bread, that is brought out on special occasions like Shabbat or holidays. Usually the one in charge of making the blessing and giving out the bread is the man, the father of the house. And again, it signifies important guests and important occasions.
את הבונה בעצם באתיופיה לזמן יש פחות חשיבות, אז את הבונה באמת עוד מכינים אותו בהרבה רוגע ובהרבה נחת, בלי לחץ, לא ממהרים לשום מקום, שזה משהו שהוא...
It's a very relaxed ceremony, people take their time, you can't be rushed, you have to enjoy the Buna ceremony, you got to relax and really be able to experience the importance of it.
ושותים אותו גם בשלושה סבבים, שכל סבב באמת הקפה מתבשל, ממש מחכים עד שהוא יהיה בשל, ובאמת עם הרבה סבלנות והרבה...
There are 3 rounds, you cook it, you serve it, you add in hot water, cook it again, and serve it again, and hopefully when you're here in person, you'll taste it for yourself. Thank you so much. So now we're continuing down the hallway to a very, very important part of the Aliyah Center, especially thanks to you and to your P2G community. The computers in this room were donated by the Jewish communities of Southern New England, USA, through the Afula Gilboa Partnership Together Jewish Agency for Israel. So we show you beautiful new computers, in which we thank you for donating and helping our Aliyah Center. And Pnina, share with us for a moment, why is it so important in the integration, education of new immigrants that they have computers in computer class like this?
Well, as you know, in the modern Western country like us, integrating into a modern society, it's a key for success, especially for new Olim, and especially for those that come in from places like Ethiopia, which is still function as a third world country. We need to make sure they have the right tools and access for the educational system, work system, and just to be part of a modern society. Without those kind of tool as a computer, there's so many things that they can be disconnected instead of connected to the entire society here today.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you on behalf of the Olim from the center. Lastly, we'll see one last important, we walk outside a little bit, here's some herbs that they're growing. Would you like to taste some? Maybe next time in person. Of course, is all the health needs that are required for new Olim focused on what they like. Lastly, you'll see a beautiful embroidery of the Ethiopian women of the Aliyah Center. Unfortunately, we don't have time today to stop and purchase something, but keep in mind when you're here in person, wonderful, beautiful arts that they can share with you. Before we conclude our virtual mission, and of course, please stay on afterwards as we have a few minutes for panel discussion, I want to share with you the incredible story of Ian. Ian is a young lady, and as you can see, she doesn't look 100% Ethiopian. And let me explain. See, her grandmother grew up in Ethiopia in a very classic Ethiopian Jewish community. At the age of 13, during Operation Moses, she was walking across the border towards Sudan like everybody else. But one night, trekking in the desert, she was separated and she lost her family. In the morning, they looked and searched for her, but they could not find her. In fact, her family had thought that she had passed away and even sat Shiva for her. She had unfortunately wandered into a Sudanese village by accident, and she was a scared child living there for many, many years, unfortunately under very, very horrific conditions and subject to violence. Fast forward many years later, from the Sudanese village, she hears that Ethiopian Jews are making Aliyah to Israel. And through many complicated efforts and miracles, she, her 2 daughters, and 4 grandchildren were able to escape and be brought home from Israel. Ian is one of those grandchildren. She might have some Sudanese DNA, but she's a full member of the Jewish community. Here she is, recently coming to the Kotel to celebrate her bat mitzvah a few months after arriving in Israel. My friends, these are the miraculous stories of the Ethiopian Jewish community and their Aliyah to Israel, and the incredible work that we partner together to bring to fruition. We say, Tzedchem l'shalom, thank you very much for visiting us in Ethiopia and here in Beit Alpha in your P2G community. And before we go any further, we are now transitioning. My honor to welcome again Penina and Shira as our panelists, and we have time for some questions for them. So feel free to write some questions in the chat. I know we got a few questions, and let's get the ball rolling. So first, thank you again, everyone, for joining us on our virtual mission from Ethiopia to Beit Alpha. And Shira, on that note, Bavakasha, tell us a little bit. What are some of the challenges of the new Olim that you see in Beit Alpha? What are some of the makasha Olim החדשים כשמגיעים לבית אלפא?
האתגר, כרגע בגלל הקורונה, האתגר הוא בעצם הקורונה, שבשנה האחרונה אנחנו ראינו שאנחנו קלטנו בעצם לתוך הקורונה ילדים שהם לא יודעים איך באמת בישראל מתנהלים. הם לא יודעים מה זה בית ספר רגיל, הם באו ישר לקורונה. אז בעצם גם עניין המחשבים והטאבלטים, זה באמת נתן לנו פתרון מאוד טוב, כן להכניס אותם ישר ללימודים ושהם יחוו, למרות שזה בצורה שונה, וזה מאוד רחוק גם ממה שהם באו, כי הם לא באו ממדינה טכנולוגית.
So one thing Shira's mentioning is obviously Corona, the challenge that we've all had. Now put yourself in the shoes of new Olim from Ethiopia who've come, and all of a sudden you have to integrate in society, but you have Corona. So Shira's saying that's one of the beautiful advantages of the new computers that your P2G community donated, because it allowed them to continue their education and allow them to really integrate the best as possible under the conditions of Corona to Israel. Great, Toda, thank you, Shira. So now, Penina, from your end, what are the challenges in Israeli society, and especially how is the Jewish Agency addressing issues of racism by some members of the Ethiopian community living in Israel? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. How's the Jewish Agency addressing issues of racism as experienced by some members of the Ethiopian community living in Israel? Please.
Okay, so it's two big questions. I will try to do it shortly. First of all, there's the challenges that I see from my experience and for many years of being active in the community is that, first of all, for some sectors in the Israel society, we still not seen as a Jews or completely real Jew, I will put it this way. There's still a question mark on our Judaism, which affect automatically about who we can marry and who we not can marry in Israel, for example, and communities that will welcome us to their synagogue. But that's a minor sectors in Israel, but it does exist, and we should not ignore that. The other challenge is that there's many assumptions that based on skin color, there's not a policy of separation or policy of the government that will separate black and white in Israel, not at all, not and ever in history, but there are many people that are people in a high rank in the Israel society, institution, etc., also in the education system, for example, that do relate to issues and things to the Ethiopian members based on assumption or wrong assumption on based on our skin color. So for example, I will put myself on the spot, for example, in previous position before the Jewish Agency as a director of Hillel Tel Aviv. I remember first days at the Tel Aviv University that people were surprised to see me as a director of organization like Hillel, or people were surprised that I'm fluent in Hebrew. And I will usually challenge them back and say, why shouldn't I be fluent in Hebrew if I grew up here since I was 3 years old? But many people still will be surprised to see someone become, even Pnina Tamanu, the Minister of Immigration and Absorption in Israel. In the beginning, people from her party, we just very good friends, so she told me, I can share with you, people from her own party will be surprised that she know to do some certain things, and people shouldn't be surprised. That's kind of a quiet racism, in my opinion. No one will tell you up front that you shouldn't or you can't, but people will question your abilities. And it's of course based on skin color. So, and what we do about racism, I think it's a lot based on education, informal and informal education. And if the education system in Israel will not be able to educate about our history from a strong, positive way, and to share our narrative that we come in with a rich heritage, that we came to Israel bizchut, as we say, and not because we here because we want to join the Jewish people, we want to return to the Jewish states, not because we were poor or miserable and we've been saved by the state of Israel. Of course, there's a lot of effort that the state of Israel and Jewish people around the world put on, but there's also many heroes from our community that struggle and put a lot of effort in order to come to Israel. And the balance of that story and narrative wasn't being shared in the first years of us in Israel. Only I will tell only in the last 10 years, there is a huge tikkun. There is a huge even kind of a renaissance requesting to hear our voices, to share our voices. And I think it's because the young generation that are born in Israel and growing up here are not ashamed, are not shy about their identity. They're very confident and they're embracing their Black, Ethiopian, Jewish, Israeli identity, which this duality can be very challenging many times. But being in a position where you know that it's a strength and not a weakness, bring us to a different stage of place today. So I guess it's really about education, and the Jewish Agency doing many ways to answer that through having a young fellow in our mechinot, which is not so easy to apply and be accepted to Mechina in Israel, the pre-army programs. And the Jewish Agency is putting a lot of effort to recruit young Ethiopians from the periphery to join those Mechinot, because that's kind of a pipeline to create an elite into the army service and then into your civil life. If it's the Kfarei Noar, the youth villages, where they provide you with, holistic system where you can provide not only the educational framework, but also the social framework to support those kids that they are living outside of home, living in a boarding school in the Kfarei Noar, but they get in a very high quality of education and a framework that teach them, give them tools and skills for civil lives outside of their neighborhoods.
Good.
That's just an example, but there's so many. Can.
so much more to say, but I see a lot of questions coming in. So Rabbi Yafa, please, floor is yours. Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. This has been so incredibly wonderful. I was so blessed from 1985 to 1987 to work in Afula in Givat HaMoreh with the Olim from Ethiopia, with Shmulik Porat, if you know Shmulik. It was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. And then in 1987, I got to go with a team of doctors and nurses and set up health clinics in Gondar. And I was able to sneak in messages and money from the Afula community to the Ethiopian community. And then I recorded those who were still in Ethiopia, messages back to the families in Israel. And it was an incredible experience. And then in 1990-91, I was part of the Operation Solomon team in Addis Ababa, which was also incredible. And then 2011-2012, I was there for 6 months for the adoption of my son, Ezra, who is from Gondar. So I have a deep connection and deep gratitude to all of you doing the work that you do. And I just want to say thank you. I'm a Siganalo.
Wow. Thank you, Rabbi Yafa. Wow. Next time you're going to be on the panel. Okay. Next question. I'll turn to Shira. Shira, it would seem like that. Are you able to visit people and places in Ethiopia? Do you have a desire to visit Ethiopia and people and places there?
לא שמעתי את השאלה, סליחה.
עוד פעם, האם את רוצה, יש לך רצון לבקר אנשים ומקומות שם באתיופיה, והאם זה אפשרי?
כן, אני חזרתי יום חמישי מאתיופיה, זה אפשרי לבקר, המצב לא כל כך בטוח, יש קצת רעשים של מלחמת אזרחים, זה לא הכי בטוח, אבל כן, אני חזרתי סוף שבוע האחרון מאתיופיה, אתיופיה יפה, מאוד יפה.
Shira says that you can visit. She was there last week. There are challenges there. They are very close to having a civil unrest, maybe even a civil war. And Shira says it's beautiful. You know, you can visit and see the Jewish community and see the country. So people are asking. We'll go back to you, Penina. People are asking, how is interracial marriage viewed in the Ethiopian-Israeli community? Nisuyin, interracial.
Well, now better, I would say. But in the 80s, it was a bit hard, especially culturally, just because there was a huge difference, a huge cultural difference of food and music and language. But it's not really a big deal. There's many couples that are intermarriage in Israel. I will say that especially Ethiopian women that getting married outside of the community. So I don't think it's a big thing. No one is making like a big deal of it. Not inside. My own two sisters are married outside of the Ethiopian community. So we like a family that very mixed. It's different to have a Russian brother-in-law, but it's fun.
Great. So one last question, want to respect everyone's time. We'll ask both for Shira and Penina. Shira can go first. What do you see as hopeful for the Ethiopian Jewish community? What do you see that's positive coming down the road? And what could American Jewish communities like the SNCC community, people are asking, what can they do to help? What can they do to help Aliyah and encourage Aliyah? As Shira מבקשים, מה את רואה בעתיד שזה חיובי בקהילה יוצאי אתיופיה? ומה הם יכולים לעשות? הם רוצים לדעת מה יכולים לתרום לעזור לעלייה לעולים מאתיופיה.
קודם כל, בעניין מה לעשות, כמו שהם עושים היום ותומכים בנו בכל מיני תוכניות, אז כן, במרכזי קליטה אנחנו עושים כל מיני סדנאות הכנה, בעצם לחיים שהם יוצאים לחיים האמיתיים בדיור קבע, גם להורים וגם לילדים, אנחנו מוצאים אותם ללמוד, מביאים להם כל מיני סדנאות הכנה, מקצועות, כדי שיוכלו להשתתף בשוק העבודה בישראל. אני חושבת שזו ההשתלבות הכי נכונה בארץ, שהם מרגישים שהם שווים והם נמצאים במקומות עבודה שהם מכבדים אותם.
Okay, so very similar to what you've been doing, support their work in the Aliyah Center, especially the programs they have that are very practical, giving the new Olim the skills that they need to be successful in Israeli society. So she thanks you and continuing the wonderful partnership, and come to visit when you go to your P2G region. Pnina, okay, lastly for you, what's some positive outlook that you see for the Ethiopian Jewish Israeli community? And what can people do to help advocate for New Orleans?
I always say that the day that we're not going to need any intervention programs, that's when we're fully integrated, right? So we're not there yet, but we are doing a lot of progress, considering, you know, the numbers of having a small community of 150,000 Ethiopian Jews in Israel and being here for maybe 40 years. So you do see students, you do see members of a Knesset, you do see many of us, you know, integrated fully. But there are a lot to do as we talk about education, the entire society, and just being respectful for other narratives and other backgrounds, and not only the Ethiopian community in Israel in general. I think that's the big change we need to do, and we all can contribute to that. But I am very optimistic because I do see that we achieved so much in 40 years in Israel, considering the background that we came from.
Amazing, amazing. I see that we didn't get to all the questions. You feel free to email them to Maya, your P2G coordinator, who can direct them to the right place. And I personally want to thank our panelists and thank them for all their work and especially for joining us on this virtual mission. And I turn it back to Maya to close it off.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Pnina, and thank you, Shira. It was, as one said in the chat, enlightening presentation. Thank you very much for taking part of it and sharing your personal stories. I would like to thank the Jewish Federation of Hartford and JCRC for initiating such an amazing program. I think it's very important, and we are looking forward to more of this program about the shared society in Israel in the near future. And also to thank the Jewish federations that are part of this partnership for their continuing contribution to the partnership and to programs like with the Ethiopian community in Bet Alpha. Thank you very much and have a nice day, football day, right? So enjoy football.
תודה.
Richard, shalom.
תודה רבה, להתראות.
להתראות.
תודה רבה.